Hi, it's Donna Joyasha from the Magnetic Life Club, and today I want to talk to you about magic. So I used to think that everybody thought the way that I did, like entrepreneurial-minded, right? And then one day I realized that we didn't, and that there's actually only a small proportion of the world who actually have the entrepreneurial brain. And I believe that entrepreneurs have the ability to dream bigger, all right? Because that's why we go after this, because we have this ability to dream bigger, to conceive bigger, to want more, and to believe that we can have it, right? And I'm working on a theory here, and perhaps I'm wrong, so comment below if I'm wrong, that I reckon a large proportion of entrepreneurs would enjoy reading fantasy books and things like that, because we get to escape into this world where things are possible and more is possible. And I know when I was like a small child growing up, and even adult, and even now, I loved fantasy books. And my favorite books when I was young was Enid Blyton, and I loved the fairy stuff or the magic and things like that. Like, it was like mind-blowing to me. It was like opened up so much for me. And it wasn't until probably a couple of years ago, that I realized that magic was real and that we are the magic. That we are the magic, right? And I want to talk to you a little bit about that today, and I'm going to use science. So if you're already like, whoa, woo-woo, she's gone off, right? I'm actually going to use science to back up what I'm talking about. So I'm going to talk about quantum physics. Now, I'm going to dumb it right down into layman's terms. So if you are a physicist or a physics student, or you're very highly intelligent, don't throw rocks at me, okay? I'm bringing this down to a level that we can all understand it and that I understand it at, okay? So I want to talk to you about something called the double slit experiment. And this was done about 100 years ago by a guy called Thomas Young. And he had a photon gun, all right? So this is what he had. He had a photon gun, and then he had like two things. One was like, let's call it a piece of paper. I'm sure it wasn't a piece of paper. That had two slits in it, right? So it's a double slit experiment. So a piece of paper with these two slits cut out of it, and then behind that there was another, say, a photogenic piece of paper that was able to record what was coming onto it from photons, okay? And he had the photon gun here firing photons at this piece of paper, and then in between was this other piece of paper, whatever it was, with the slits in it that was allowing the photons through. Okay, so you with me so far? So this is the double slit experiment. And what he was trying to do is he was trying to work out how photons behaved. Now, what is a photon, right? A photon is the smallest particle of what things are made up of. So if when you look at us and then you go down into us, and you kind of like, if you had an electron microscope and you're going further and further into us, interesting how the more you blow us up, the more space is in there, right? We look solid, we feel solid, but we're actually not solid. At the smallest part of what we are made up of photons. So we're atoms, and then we're nucleus, and we're protons, and they're all made up of photons. And photons are energy. They're just vibrational energy. They're light. So a photon is a particle of light, a light particle. So everything in this universe, at the smallest building block that we have so far, is made up of photons, which is light. So we're made up of photons, right? How crazy is that? This is why we're the magic, right? Because we're actually just vibrational energy. We're light. How amazing is that? Anyway, let's get back to the double slit experiment. You can see I get very excited about this stuff. So he was firing these photons at this first piece of paper. The photons were going through these slits, heading this second piece of paper, and when they developed it, they could see where these photons were touching. And they were basically coming up two slits, looking identical to what was in front, which is what you'd expect, right? The gun's firing the photons out, they're going through and they're hitting, and wherever there was not a slit, they're being blocked from getting to this other piece of paper. Now, then something interesting happened. So I don't know whether or not they did this consciously or unconsciously, or accidentally, I should say. So they left the room and they left the photon gun on. So maybe it was a mistake. I hear that it's a mistake, right? But whether or not that's true, or whether or not it's all a part of their study. They left, and the photon gun was still firing. And when they came back, the result they had was different. So when they were there observing the photon gun, they had the two slits, they had the solid slits. When they were not there, when they came back, what they had was more like zebra striping. So they still had the majority of the two slits were harder, but then they had like this shadowing, all the way along this striped shadowing. And they were able to repeat this over and over again, and it's been repeated many times since then. So the Copenhagen interpretation of this study is that when photons are observed by consciousness, right, by us, when we're consciously observing them, they act as a particle. And when they're not being observed consciously, they act as a wave. How crazy is that? The very act of observation of the photon changes its behavior. So I just want to sink that in, right? Because we're made of photons, which means that something observed us, something consciously created us, something collapsed us into what we are. Because what they were starting to realize is that atoms and things like that, when they're not observed, they're actually not like, we draw them like with with the sun, with the planets rotating around them, right? With nucleuses and the protons and everything else that rotates the cloud of these subatomic particles that are around this nucleus, right? Or within the atom. We draw it like that, like it's a planet around a sun. So planets around a sun and moons and things like that. But what they're beginning to realize, or what they realize now, is that it doesn't look like that at all. And when it's not being observed, it's actually just an infinite number of possibilities of where these subatomic particles could be. And then when we observe it, they collapse into where they are. How crazy is that, right? And this is what we're made of. So how does this relate to us? Well, have you ever seen somebody who seems quite well, and then they go to a doctor for some routine testing, and then something shows up in the blood work, and then something else shows up, and then or they get an x-ray, and then, oh, it's arthritis, and then all of a sudden this person has pain that they didn't have before because they've been given a diagnosis. Have you ever observed that? Or maybe it's happened to you. And this is what happens when we're consciously observed into something. We collapse. So we have this whole possibility, this infinite probability of what we could be or what we could create or what we are. And then when something observes us into a state of like disease, we collapse into that. And then we become sick, or then we become pain, or then and then we start to feel it, right? And you can get locked up in a diagnosis. And you've probably also heard stories of people who were sick, who went and got this diagnosis, and then they got even sicker because of this diagnosis, and then they end up going for a third or a fourth opinion, and they were told, actually, none of that is right, this is what's happening, and then they got well. Because they were collapsing themselves into something that actually wasn't true, but because they believed it was, right? So this is where the magic is. We can shift energetically. We can create what we want in life, because at our very basis core, we are just vibrational energy. We're photons. Now, I'm not saying that I can make myself taller or, it's within the realms of genetics from our physical appearance, right? But what I want to achieve and how I think and how I feel and what I'm able to do and the actions I'm able to take, this is all to do with energy and quantum physics. Now, you may or may not have watched a video I did recently on the structure of success, and how we're caught up in problem-solving identities, and how to actually achieve what we want in life, we need to break free from that structure and be able to create a structure where we're just creative genius. So if you haven't, go check that video out, because that explains more about how we can do this, right? How we need to remove our resistance to having what we want in life. We can decide what we want to create, and then we can go for it. And when you get into that, when you get into the flow, it's amazing how fast things happen. It's amazing how energies start to align. It's amazing how things actually start coming to you. Now, it doesn't happen if you just sit on the top of a mountain and meditate on it and pretend and manifest and stuff like that. That doesn't happen from just that. You actually have to take action on your dreams to have something, which makes sense, right? We need to take action. But the problem is a lot of people can't take that action because of the resistance in their life. And that comes through, it's a whole other topic there. Where does that resistance come from? I'm not going to go into that in this video. But I want you to get from this is that, one, we are the magic. And two, we can shift our energy away from a structure that is stopping us from having what we want into a structure that can. So go check out my video on the structure of success, and come to my presentation where I talk more about this, all right? And then in that presentation, I take you through this really cool process called a superconscious recode, where we're going to shift the information that you're actually getting that is collapsing you into where you are in life, and remove the resistance to having what you want so that you can start to take action on it and have it, right? So this is a really cool process. It's going to be webinar format. We're not even going to see you. You can wear your pajamas. You can be naked if you want. Just don't tell us about it, right? But come to this. It's going to be a closed-out experience. You don't need to do anything. All the work is on me. And we're going to do a super conscious recode. And you're going to learn more about this work that I'm doing and how people's lives are changing because of it. And all you need to do to come to that free presentation is to go to themagneticlifeclub.com/manifest18. That's going to take you to a form. We can register so you can get all the emails and the links and everything that you need to come to that. All right. I hope you got something amazing out of this and that you're having a fantastic week, and I will see you next time.